Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence. Okay, and we are recording. So, to all you audience members out there, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Lemaster, for episode number 92, with very special guests, Dr. Jim Fadiman and Adam Bramlage. Now, we've had both these guests on the show before individually, and it's a pleasure to be able to bring them both on together. This is actually one of my first podcasts having multiple guests on the Zoom platform at once, so I'm hoping that everything works out technically soundly for me. But yeah, let's just jump right in. By this point, the listeners will have already heard the introduction before this show and gotten a little taste of who each of you are. And if they want to go find out a little bit more, they can go back and listen to the other episodes. But the first question that I want to launch in, because it is kind of serendipitous of how we all got connected. I initially met Jim at the MAPS conference in 2017. And then, he met Adam. And then I was introduced to Adam through another mutual friend, and come to find out that Adam and Jim are working together. And so all these synchronicities kind of are happening very rapidly these days. And I'm very happy for all that to happen. But I'd love to hear, Jim, from you. On the podcast I had with Adam, he sort of told us his side of the story of how you guys met from his perspective. And I was hoping you could share with the audience and with me your perspective. What was your experience in how you first met Adam and how you guys came to this working relationship?
Well, I think it's hard to say we met. It's kind of like we meshed. Adam appeared and said, "Oh, Jim Fadiman, you're really super." And I thought, well, at least he's got good judgment. What else we know about him? And then I began to get what his background was, and he already knew a lot of mine. And we kind of moved from, I was this kind of, I've been introduced once as a legend, which is one step closer to death. But I was important, and he was excited by that. And so we started really to be pretty much on a friend basis from the beginning. And he drove down to be with me, and ended up, this was early COVID. Actually it was before COVID. And it so happened that I have, because I'm older, my cornea is thickened. It's not a good idea for me to drive in the dark places that I don't know. And I also find that the Stanford Hospital, which is a number of city blocks, is hard to find anything and park your car and get to someone. And so it so happened Adam wanted to be with me. So he ended up helping me visit my brother, who was terrified and in the Stanford Hospital, on a day when I couldn't have managed it any other way. And my brother immediately visited. I had to be there. There was no way I could work it out. Uber doesn't work that way. So in a sense, we met under my duress, and his just so cool, and so I got it handled. Don't worry, work out. I found technically so more adept than you that you don't have to worry about that either. And I think it was there. And the more I saw what Adam was doing, the more I simply respected what he's doing, and that he's involved in one of the breakthrough areas that I was not yet in. And so we've been on a number of programs together. We're both helping some of the people in Europe, and we have our own projects. So it's On the surface, it's a kind of, good professional relationship, and below that is a very deep friendship.
Yeah, I think those are the best relationships. The best professional relationships anyway have deeply rooted friendships underneath, heavy personal investment in each other. I've been a part of a few different research teams where there's very little personal investment in the team members, and to be quite frank, you produce less than excellent work that way, and when we are personally invested in each other, it seems like, we really care about not only each other's work, but each other's well-being, and we feed off of that energy and we produce much, much better work.
So in the psychedelic world, and I've worked with an awful lot of psychedelic groups, and I've also been a management consultant for on and off 20 years. Um, we're a nicer group than most groups. And partly, I think it's because we've kind of put our ego into its rightful place as a functional part of us, not as a ruler. And the other is there's a common vision, which is almost everyone I know in psychedelics is not in it for himself or herself, but part of making either the world or individuals or systems function in a way that's the Dalai Lama says you can always be kinder. Whatever your religious persuasion is, there's something in it about kindness. Why don't you do that? And the psychedelic world feels that way. So it isn't that Adam and I are hustling, which I've also done a bit of. We're helping, and therefore helping each other. It's a different relationship in a sense from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's a result of, the molecules that we're interested in and the molecules that we work with and self-experiment with, or do you think that that's sort of brought to the table by the type of people that are drawn to these kind of medicines?
Well, now that we've got another generation or two, I hope it's both.
Mm.
Because I was not one of the people who should be, attracted to this. Okay, I had a totally different life picture. I had no interest in mysticism and altered states, not a hell of a lot in self-improvement. I was kind of a jerk. But what I found is that Jim Fadiman does whatever he does, but psychedelics puts you in a larger context. So it's like a single tree really is in a terrible position because trees are designed to help each other, mm-hmm. and they work better when they're helping each other. There's a wonderful book about the language of trees, and this guy talks about how sad it is when you go into a park and there's like a single specimen tree kind of alone out there. And one of the things that the psychedelic world is, you don't feel alone when you're with other people, because you've shared something that you can't describe, but you know that you've all shared it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find the same thing, Adam? I see you nodding over there.
Absolutely. I just really appreciate what Jim said. And I think what's so special about our relationship is he's made me a close friend as well, and when I first reached out to him, I had hopes of mentorship and him helping educate me and further help me learn about all of the things he's learned about in microdosing. And before any of that, he just befriended me and he just became a dear friend. And I think honestly, I'm in contact with Jim more during the day than anyone in my life right now. And he is just always there for me as a support in my personal life, but also as somebody to advise in the future of microdosing and what's going on with the world. So I'm just grateful that he has made me a friend. And I think that's part of what this psychedelic community is about. It's about community. And these molecules are very important. But what's also important is this connection to community and to people that want people to be happier and healthier and to work through their trauma. So I'm just really happy to be his friend. And he reminds me of that all the time. And I'm just grateful for the friendship.
Yeah. And the way you describe, your relationship with Jim, it doesn't sound at anything at all, like what you described yourself to be, earlier in your life, being a jerk. Can you give us some insight as to who Jim Fadiman was before that?
Well, let's put it this way. I was at Harvard, and at Harvard, the one thing they teach you is you're really smart.
Mm.
They also don't teach you that that doesn't make you a much of a being. But since everyone is smart and everyone has slightly got bad social skills, it works really quite well as a system.
Mm.
I ended up in theater at Harvard. And when people in theater are really very comfortable pretending to be someone else, it's a very comfortable, it isn't like it isn't like they've changed selves. It's they really are pretending. And when you're in enough different shows, you see people kind of shift into some kind of slightly being like the character they're playing. So there was a comfortable facade that I was very happy in. And someone once said behind my back, does Fadiman ever have a serious thought? Now, the thing that's interesting about that is I was comfortable hearing that. See, now in retrospect, that really sounds pretty shallow and shabby. Okay. But if you're somewhat shallow and shabby, it sounds pretty good. So I was simply kind of a hedonist and trying to work things out, and went to Paris because that was cool. And I was writing a novel in a 6th floor walk up because that was cool. And then I met my undergraduate professor, Richard Alpert, and that was cool. And then he took from his breast pocket a little pill bottle. And I thought, that is not cool, whatever that is. I don't know. Because I was so straight. I didn't drink coffee, okay? But a little psilocybin will loosen some of your most kind of least useful beliefs. And so my beliefs were loosened with Richard, and a couple of months later, I ended up back in the United States, having been offered the opportunity to go to Vietnam, and probably learn to kill people that I knew I was not going to be good at it. You just know certain things you're not good at. And I would have ended up as a major cost to the government as a VA patient for a long, long time. Mm. Or I could go to graduate school in psychology. So not really, and said I had to leave my wonderful, idyllic, sybaritic life in Paris. So when I came to graduate school, it felt incredibly limiting and constraining and boring, but it was way better than the other choice. Mm. And while I was at Stanford, there was a group in Menlo Park called the International Foundation for Advanced Study, IFAS. And they were working with psychedelics, dose, clinical setting. They were really the developers of the setting that every psychedelic study of high doses in the world now uses, which is a comfortable living room-like setting. And I became the psychologist in that group, which for a first-year graduate is a fairly heavy burden, particularly when you've had almost no psychology as an undergraduate anyway. Mm. So that shift from being somewhat hedonistic and having an interesting meals and interesting travel to being a graduate student, and at the same time having a truly transcendent experience that totally blew my worldview away. And that the person who had to integrate that expanded worldview has been pretty consistent since then. So I easily identify with the graduate student about second year, and I don't really identify much with the undergraduate with all his theater.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, you talked about this experience in Paris with Mr. Alpert, and was that your first psychedelic experience? Or and you also referred to having a transcendent experience, and I was wondering, like, was that first experience like sort of a low dose introduction, or was that a high dose transcendent experience in Paris?
The first dose in Paris, now that I know a lot more, the first dose in Paris was probably a moderate dose of psilocybin. I had no loss of identity. I would say my kind of psychological rigidities were reduced. So the world was a lot more comfortable and more interesting, and I was much more open to it. And I was aware that there was another way of seeing things that was healthy, that was more loving, that was more supportive. But it was still kind of a concert dose.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to Stanford and I got to the group in Menlo Park, I had gotten to the Harvard model, which was a couple of people take it together or a group takes it together and you hang out. And if someone wants to be quiet for a while, they're quiet. You didn't have terribly bad trips because you didn't have terribly high trips. And the Harvard group also had a great upset when it discovered high dose LSD, which was later. So then I had a high dose session, and instead of hanging out, suddenly they're feeling like this is all too much. And they say, well, maybe you'd like to lie down. Okay, I'll lie down. Maybe you'd like to have headphones. I'd like headphones. Maybe it would be easier if we put these eye shades on you. Okay. And then 3 or 4 hours later, whoa, that's what you guys are really talking about. I hadn't the faintest idea, and I've been working here a couple of months. And that's what you guys are doing. Mm-hmm. So, and it's been like that ever since.
Yeah, I love the way that the group at Menlo Park sort of brought you into the fold experientially, having come from a psychology background myself and worked in various graduate psychology labs and things like that. Usually you don't get introduced to the work in such a way. They usually just unload a bunch of their publications on you and say, hey, read up on all the work that we've done and figure out how you can improve it. But to give you that high dose session and then guide you or help facilitate such a transcendental experience and come out of that and like, wow, I'm really into this work now, and this is what I'm all about. So was the Menlo Park, was that the same group that was doing the experiments on problem solving, or did that come later with the microdosing?
Problem solving was the last research. Basically, it was a clinical setting. It was kind of outpatient clinical. About half of the people had clinical issues and had to go through a psychiatrist in order to get accepted into the program. They paid for it. So it didn't have that kind of research purity. It was not a double blind, and no one was very interested. Double blind for high dose LSD is silly. Okay. And then a couple of years in, and we published in journals, in appropriate journals, very, very kind of groundbreaking papers that no one was particularly excited by in the culture, because on the other side, as we were being kind of good and straight and clinically valuable and pushing transcendence, the underground was growing, and it was much more interesting. Tim and Dick had already been fired from Harvard, and all that was going on. Near the end, before the government stopped everything, we decided to do a study on could psychedelics at a reasonable dose be useful for solving basically rational scientific problems. Mm-hmm. There had already been a study with artists. And the problem when you study artists and they say, yeah, my work after I got turned on is really better. Well, art critics are perfectly happy to say yes or no, but there's no way to really say that. But when you have a scientific problem, the nice thing is you either make progress solving it or you don't. It's very, very clean. So we had a lot of senior scientists who had to have a pressing problem, a professional problem that they had spent up to 3 months on failing. Now, when you're someone who's a fairly high-ranking scientist, you don't have a lot of failure in your background. You've been smart all along. So when you're not able to solve the kind of problem you're in, it's emotionally, you're attached to it, okay? And we said to them, you guys can come in, we're gonna give you the chance to be the most creative you've ever been, and you can work on your problems. Your professional technical problems. And what's curiously fascinating about Set and Setting is we had like 28 people. None of them veered off into personal space. None of them ended up kind of tripping away when we could have. We did have one person who kind of played for a while, and he was so happy that he wanted to come back. And we brought him back and gave him a half dose. Now, this was the person who also invented the mouse.
No, the computer mouse.
Yeah. And invented the idea of using a computer to move letters and words around. He's one of the great, great kind of, Steve Jobs figured out how to make a box and sell it, but it was based on Doug Engelbart's work. And I would like to say that he invented the mouse in our little Menlo Park living room like setting, but he didn't. He'd already invented it, and I was actually consulting to him at the time. But it was that kind. So that study was very different than we've seen, and it's never been replicated in the scientific literature. But there are hundreds of companies whose inventor, who's kind of idea person, would admit that psychedelics were very helpful at some point in the development of the product.
Yeah, Jim, I was actually reading the chapter that you were just discussing in your very famous book, Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, last night. And what I found amazing, Shane, was that he had, I think, like architects and designers and people who had these pressing jobs, drawings for buildings and land design. And I think every single one of them got approved. And almost everybody in the study that was having trouble, whether it was an architectural design or solving a mathematical problem or something to do with technology or electronics, pretty much everybody was able to solve that problem successfully. And what I found so amazing was all the architectural designs were approved. They were all loved. And it was literally in the first take. They didn't come back for a redo. People really enjoyed what they got the first time around from these people in the study.
The problem for the architects, by the way, is they had not been able to please their client for a long. There were a couple of architects with projects. So one of their problem is they didn't know how to build a building, but they were unable to come up with a sufficiently good vision that their client went for it. And indeed, the clients went for it. Yeah, actually, there's one that isn't in the book that is, to me, pushes the edges even for people in psychedelics, okay? So the person, having had approximately either 100 micrograms of LSD or 200 milligrams of mescaline, has had several hours of music and eye shades, and is now in the afternoon set loose on his problem. And he's a designer. And what he does is, in his mind, he lays out a circuit with capacitors and resistors and so forth. He then, in his mind, runs an electric current through it. And he then observes in his mind where it fails, okay? He then in his mind, builds another circuit. This is like visually physical objects. Circuits now are, they're microscopic, but we're talking, you can see what you're doing. And and then he would run electricity through it again. Now, the thing that's fascinating is, in his mind, the rules of physics were observed. Meaning this wasn't, in his mind, this wasn't mental electricity. This was electricity, and capacitors worked as they did, and resistors worked as they did, and circuit breakers worked as they did. All the laws of normal matter were being not created by him, but observed. And that, to me, is something that nobody's really taken on as to explain. That doesn't get explained by more colored lines inside your head connecting more parts.
Yeah, and both you guys bring up really fascinating things right there that I want to touch on. So first, Jim, talking about the idea of how subjectively and phenomenologically within our minds, what these substances can help enhance is our ability to run simulations, right? Simulating a problem through its various iterations, finding where the hitches are going to be. I know that as a jujitsu athlete, I'm at the level that I'm at, I need to, it's a mental chess game. It's a 3D chess game with my body too. So I'm thinking oftentimes 2, 3, 4 movements ahead of my opponent, and also having simultaneous simulations being held in my mind. So if they react in a certain way to one of my methods of administration of this submission, then I have a backup plan and I have another route that I can go, and I know where I'm going to come and hit those roadblocks. So I know that microdosing for sure helps me hold a greater number of simulations in my mind at the same time, and also helps me to think and hold more steps ahead in the process than I would be able to in a normal state of mind.
I'll give you actually another sports one, which was interesting to me, because we have a number of cases where people simply are better in their sport.
Mm-hmm.
Yours is probably one of the most fun that I know. This is a college, not necessarily an athlete, but a college guy who plays volleyball. What he says is, with microdosing, it isn't that he is better physically. He says, I am a little. He says, but I'm much more aware of everyone else on our side. I'm much more aware of strategy. I can see the whole game rather than the ball comes, I hit. And that was his shift. We have lots of people who have made the team in college when they started microdosing, and that kind of improvements and some fascinating breakthroughs in running. But that particular one is very much like your internal strategy, which is the two of you are a team. From, I guess from a keto point of view, there's only a team. There's never an opponent, but you're both working the same reality. And therefore you're in a sense, you're cooperating in making your opposition as good as possible. Is that a fair way of saying what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost as if the psychedelic opens up extra sensory capabilities so that you can pick up on the energy of someone else, or you can pick up on sometimes even I'll feel like I can sense what strategy my opponent is trying to employ before they even know what strategy they're working on, and then I already have answers to those questions, and they're like, how did you read my mind? Like, you knew what I was going to do before I even knew I was going to do it. And yeah, that's a very real thing. And I can imagine in team sports too, you can have a greater sense for say on a football field, like where your teammate that you're blocking for is going to make a move next, so that you can anticipate that and be the best teammate for that given situation. I'm sure, I know that as teams work together for longer periods of time, they get a sense for what their teammates are going to do in any given situation. And I'm sure psychedelics just enhance that even more.
Well, I'm thinking not of a psychedelics, but when you look at a world's best, and I did some consulting for a hockey team once, and among the players was Wayne Gretzky. And Wayne Gretzky, for some of your listeners, was one of the great hockey players of all time. And I'm down in the pit, so my nose is, isolated, and I'm watching, and what I'm seeing is everybody's good, and I watch how people deal with getting close to each other, which is what a lot of hockey is about, and everyone behaved in ways that I could follow. Someone got close, you moved, you dealt. Gretzky was half a second ahead of all that. Nobody ever got to Gretzky. He was away before they were exactly the way you're saying it. Before they knew they were moving in that direction, he knew they would move in that direction, and he was somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, it's like watching everyone else was playing, and then there's this magical guy who just is of another realm. And I can only imagine what Gretzky would do with a couple of microdoses.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's fascinating. I've seen a documentary on Gretzky where he goes into what he did as a kid to make himself that next level hockey player. And he used to
Yeah.
spend hours with a pencil drawing all the different angles that his puck could go, or the skates could go, or the way it would bounce off the board. So he was a step ahead of people because of the preparation, the visualization, the meditation. And yeah, it would have been just a whole nother level had he, maybe had the opportunity to microdose.
Yeah, so he'd been running those simulations since he was a child and had that framework already conditioned and trained into himself. That's really awesome. I'm sure people like Michael Jordan and folks like that too in different sports, but Adam, you brought up something too with the architecture piece that I wanted to touch on, because it's a thought that I've been having, and Jim, you might have a little bit of affinity to this idea, and I don't know if anybody's actually done this, but so I'm currently working on my PhD in social work, and my dissertation is going to be centered around psychedelics. And I've oftentimes thought about writing like as a side piece to the actual academic dissertation, just a side piece talking about how the journey has been for an individual to go through a strenuous academic degree program while gaining insight from psychedelic journey work, like personal psychedelic journey work. And your idea with the architects and how on a moderate dose they're solving these problems and coming up with these drafts that are being accepted on the first try. It makes me think like perhaps a study could be done with a bunch of dissertation writing students where half of them get moderate doses of psilocybin and half don't, and see whose dissertations turn out better or require less revisions than the group.
We're already in that study, only nobody's doing the comparison, because there's something called the graduate list, and it's a list originally sponsored by MAPS, and I helped create it. And it allows graduate students in any field to communicate with each other on a listserv. And there's over 1,000 people on it in maybe 15 fields, from literature to nursing to social work to very hard science, very hard biological science. And they talk to each other and they help each other. And someone says, my library can't find this. Someone else says, I'll scan my copy, which I got in Bolivia 15 years ago. So it's a helping community. And so we have now hundreds of students getting their advanced degrees or their internships or their MDs or their residencies with the help of psychedelics. So actually, how come you're not a member?
I probably am. I just get so many emails from MAPS. I bet it just gets lost in the shuffle. But
it's not a MAPS. It's not a MAPS. They down at the bottom where you when you write a book, your publisher says, we deny any interest in this book and anything you do with anything this guy. The MAPS now says we don't run this list. It just and it is an independent item. But it's fascinating because you're getting one of the things you see, graduate students are not inherently cooperative with each other, because the way it works is there's a lot less room in the job world than there are graduate students.
It's competition between students.
There's a competition built into the system. So when you have a cross current of incredible cooperation, and also people are saying, hey, I'm trying to do a dissertation on such and such, and I'm willing to change schools. Where do you think I could go? And someone says, well, there's this guy in Canada who's been helping me, And I think you would like him, and he's got a lab, and so forth. People are assisting each other in their careers as well. So it's really a very beautiful group. And then now and then there's a controversy, and there's 50 comments, and then someone says, wait a moment, this list isn't about being mad at each other, and then they change subjects.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get on that list for sure. And part of my reason for wanting to write this thing is it's sort of like an exercise in meta-analysis, where I'm writing this dissertation about primarily ketamine assisted psychotherapy.
Right.
And I undergo my own ketamine journeys during my doctoral program, and I tell you what, like, I've read almost as much of the literature as I can find on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and ketamine as a molecule, but the molecule itself, when it interacts with my consciousness, gives me so many more answers than all the literature I've read combined. And I go into it with my research questions and things like that, and the ketamine itself sort of speaks those answers and provides the answers. Yeah.
Well, there's you should definitely be writing the story to the side of your dissertation. And just a hint, just a suggestion is, don't tell the professoriate that you're doing, okay? It's kind of like, look, if we wanted to know about your personal life, we'd have picked a different field. This is psychology or social work. But I will give you a fascinating that ketamine is helping you kind of solve some of the problems of the dissertation. There was a study that Narby did, where he had several scientists who were on different research projects, and they agreed that they would take ayahuasca and they would ask ayahuasca for help on these problems. A little bit like our study, only nobody ever asks LSD for anything. LSD doesn't seem to have a personality, but ayahuasca clearly does. And so they did. They took ayahuasca, and among the things that happened is they asked for help on their highly technical professional issues. Now, the only one I recall was somebody was looking at the proteins in sperm, and they were looking for what is the key protein that makes sperm do whatever sperm does. And ayahuasca said, that's never going to work. Says, wait a moment, I asked you what protein, and you're saying it's never going to work, And ayahuasca says it's more than one protein. It's several proteins. Now that shifts the nature of the problem. It adds enormously to the complexity of possibilities. But if you're nature, you don't care. You can make things very complicated. If you're doing a dissertation or you're doing a scientific research project, your goal is to simplify it down to as few variables as possible. And it was a lovely moment when you look at this, because there's a common sense to it. And the, of course, question is, how does ayahuasca know about the nature of proteins in sperm? Ayahuasca is not a really sexy tree. And the answer is, you better ask ayahuasca how it knows that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely, I can see why it will be valuable for us, the community, to have your sidebar. Okay, I suspect that your dissertation will be wonderfully respectable and sensible and allow you to move along in your career. I admit, by the way, I've been on a lot of dissertation committees, and I'm kind of hard-ass. And then I step back, and sometimes I go read my dissertation, and I think, oh, it doesn't have any better than that. Okay, I can back off and just be helpful. But when you're in the professoriate, it's a kind of game to be tough, rather than necessarily, and hopefully you have a senior advisor who's really super helpful. But it's an interesting game you're in, and I love that you've got a side game going that will have a very different readership than the journal that your dissertation eventually lands up in.
Yeah. And Adam, I saw you getting ready to say something a little while ago, but I kind of cut you off. I'm wondering if it's still on the front of your mind.
Yeah, it is. I heard Paul Stamets the other day talk about microdosing for problem solving.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that he really thinks that microdosing could be the answer to climate change. And that what we need as humans is we need a nootropic substance that we're taking almost every day that helps uplift our mood. And if we wake up every day happier, we're going to feel more creative. If we're feeling more creative, we're not going to get down as easily. We're going to spend more time trying to solve these problems. So, Paul was just talking about how important microdosing could be to saving out solutions to the planet. And, we all know that Paul just figured out, how to stop bee colony collapse. And I'm sure that had to do with all the mushrooms he's eaten over the years, but just the simple idea of introducing mushroom tinctures to the bees who then bring it back to the hive. And that's what makes me really excited about psychedelics. And what's so awesome about that research that Jim did is a lot of these people that were coming into this study had struggled solving this problem for a really long time. And they succeeded. And that's why I really think in this next decade, we need to look at psychedelics as a way for us to help solve the problems of global warming, of climate change, of bee colony collapse. So I'm just really excited about happier people taking more time to be creative and thus solving more problems. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just Buckminster Fuller and how much I've heard him talk about how LSD really opened his mind to all those fabulous designs and all the possibilities of geometrics and architectural design. So I'm just a big fan of what these psychedelics can do for problem solving. I also think, as somebody that just spent a week in the Mayan Riviera, that the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Egyptians and these ancient people were using large and small doses to access ideas on how to make these pyramids, on how to build these huge structures, on how to do certain things. So I think that the use of psychedelics for problem solving is probably something that's been going on since the beginning of time when we hiked out of the jungle and maybe started eating those mushrooms.
Yeah, especially especially with the climate change piece too, and there's this study it only came out I think in the last couple of years, but showing that folks who take psilocybin naturally come out of their experience having a closer connection or affinity with nature, and that I think was has huge implications for the climate change problem, right? Because I feel like most people are just so disconnected from the environment. Like we feel like the environment is out there when we are part of the environment, like we are nature, but we disconnect ourselves from it and therefore think that we can control it or hold dominion over it, and it's a separate thing. But when you come out of the experience with the mushroom, it breaks down those barriers, it dissolves those boundaries and shows you that you are part of the environment. And if you're not taking care of the climate and thinking about these choices that you put out through pollutants and plastics and landfills and things like that, that you're actually killing yourself in the process, not just the landscape around you. And I'm glad you brought up this idea of performance enhancement, because and Jim, you probably know this better than either of us because you've been in the field way longer than us, but it seems like the vast majority of research and interest in studying these medicines, these molecules, has gone towards healing people of mental health, physical health, all sorts of traumas, things like that, which is it deserves its due because there are a lot of people suffering and we really need to help people. But I feel like an entire half of what we could be studying is just being left out, when that is like, how do we use these things to evolve as a species? How do the well use these things to enhance their cognitive abilities, enhance their physical abilities, move our consciousness up a level to evolve into something greater than we are? Because obviously what we are is eating away. We're killing ourselves very slowly and sometimes very quickly, and we need some sort of intervention. So why isn't that a larger part of psychedelic studies, like looking into the potential positive performance enhancing benefits?
I think I'm realizing that Adam is taking it, taking the study that we did in the 60s and extrapolating it in a very sensible way that I hadn't thought about. And if I really look at an ecological organization versus, say, an organization that's interested in a particular car, my guess is the percentage of people in the ecological organization that have had psychedelic experience will be much higher. Okay, so that, and I recall I did a talk at Yale once, and I was in a phase when I was handing out questionnaires whenever I'd give a talk, asking, have you used psychedelics? What happened? Good trips, bad trips, any revelation, any important insights? And I was kind of comparing schools because I'd also talked at UC Santa Cruz. So I assumed at Yale I would have a somewhat more sober group. And of the ones that came in, what I found is that people at Santa Cruz more psychedelics. People at Yale took much less psychedelics, much more seriously. And a number of them made career changes after their psychedelic experience. People went from finance to psychology. People went from psychology to biology. And there were two people who made very major shifts in religious orientation. One became much more attracted and attached to their religion, and one became very detached and away from. Now, it so happens it was the same religion. So that we're clearly dealing with individuals. But what we're seeing is the question of how can you, in a sense, maximize human potential for scientific problem solving, for social decency, for all whatever your goals are. And I think what Adam is saying, we've begun to not pay attention to how we can use it to make real differences in the world problems. And we've paid a lot of attention how it can help sick people. And now partly that's because the part of the government that deals with putting substances in your body doesn't have categories for wellness. It's not, pharmaceuticals are by definition almost, you can't get them unless something's wrong with you. And the difference, of course, is education. You're supposed to get better. You're supposed to be better at it if you're already good. So it's a different model. And of course, inventions and so forth. So what we've done to bring psychedelics back out of their kind of 40 years in the desert is perhaps only bring them back in a certain way, because the way it feels least frightened. But on the side, if you read all the newspaper articles about microdosing, a lot of them say it's a Silicon Valley fad, and then the article goes on. The Silicon Valley meaning people who are young, healthy, and overly smart. And the answer to that is probably that's a lot of truth to it, which is, as we get reports from around the world, a lot of them are from very, very smart people who are using it not for mental illness to health, but from health to mastery. They want to be better at what they're already very good at.
Yeah, athletes too. And, I know a lot of professional fighters that microdose because it's one of the untestable substances, and, they get all these performance enhancing effects. And yeah, it almost seems like the larger doses are more tailored towards healing potentials, things like that. And then the microdoses are more tailored for everyday performance upgrades, And I was wondering, since you are commonly referred to as, the godfather of microdosing, what was the first time you heard about microdosing? Like, when was the first time you discovered it or heard about it or even thought that could be something, useful? Because when I think of like the 60s and 70s, I think of people just using large doses at festivals and things like that.
Well, those of us who, of course, are professionals and think through this thing carefully, none of us had the faintest idea or imagined that low doses, one, existed, and two, were worth a damn.
Mm-hmm.
And I was among the people who, I wasn't interested in the psychotherapeutic doses. I was only interested in transcendence. If you didn't come back and say, do you know that I'm Buddha? And I say, Buddha, and they say, yes. And I say, we'd be fine. Are you immortal? Yes. And, you know, I was in that group. And I think the universe said, I think we're going to play a little joke on this guy. We're going to get him interested, not in this top drawer stuff, but kind of what's under your socks. We're going to get him into this little teeny stuff way down at the bottom that has none of these fascinating effects. No visions, no breakthroughs, no remembering past lives, no being eaten alive by anacondas, none of that. What happens when you microdose is, well, I feel better, or I'm drinking less coffee, or I'm running, 2 minutes faster than I usually run. It's like mundane.
Mm-hmm.
It has no glamour. And I heard about it from Robert Forte, Forte, who was also one of the people who first suggested that MMDA be of value before Rick Dobbins got involved. And he was telling me that Albert Hoffman had said to him that microdoses exist, that low doses might be helpful for him in a situation he was in his life. And that it turned out much later that Albert took not as low as microdoses, but a little higher when he wanted to walk in the forest and have ideas. So it turns out it was, and what Albert said is he could never get Sandoz interested in low doses. And had Sandoz been interested in low doses, there might have never been a market for Ritalin and its grandchild Adderall and Provigil. So Albert had a pretty good idea, and there's a wonderful little teeny squib in an interview that a bunch of really, psychedelics had with on his 100th birthday. And in that interview, Albert says something like, you ought to try a low dose. And Rick Dobbins says, what? What's that? And Albert says, it's really good for ideas. And Rick says something like, really? And then the topic changes. And so about 10 years later, I come along and someone about it, I get interested. And that's how science works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such an interesting story about how it it was almost like it was introduced to the world, but rejected by so many different entities. It's like these psychedelics, even at high doses, are supposed to open your mind to the possibility of lots of things, but low dose psychedelics, like, we're not going to be open minded to that at all. And Adam, I know for you that, you've had large healing doses of psychedelics, but you have found the most value in the microdoses for long-term use, right?
Absolutely. If you're doing a large dose, you're usually not doing that in your day-to-day life, right? You're not
Mm-hmm.
dealing with getting your kids to school on time or dealing with the stressful emails from work. So what I find so powerful about these microdosing is we get to be powerful and productive and energized and positive in our day-to-day life. And we talked earlier about problem solving. And I just kind of had this idea that, day-to-day life is problem solving. Multiple problems come up a day that you have to solve. And I think that that's what's so powerful about people using microdosing in a safe protocol, is that the day-to-day problems don't seem to bother you as much. You get to the bottom of them sooner. You're able to solve them faster. So I really do think, beyond depression and addiction and mood and brain trauma and all these amazing things that psilocybin microdosing can help you with. I really think it's just that day-to-day help with the problem solving and getting through things. So I think that's really important. You know, everybody can't do a large dose journey every day or every week or every month. You know, usually it's multiple months at a time. So I really think microdosing is something that can help people on the day to day and can really help them with that problem solving that comes with day-to-day life.
Yeah, I love thinking about it that way, and it makes so much sense. I mean, to put life, this huge thing that we all experience, into the context of, you know, all it really is a series of problems that need to be solved, you know, from getting up to coordinating brushing my teeth to fixing my coffee. Like, they may be mundane problems, but they're all problems, and it's all problem solving. And if we can become more efficient at those problems, then we can, you know, I think, live happier, more productive lives.
Well,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The news from Silicon Valley is that people say, I do enjoy the work I'm doing more than I have before. And there's a fear among some of the people who fear things that all we're microdosing is squeezing more work out of people for the capitalist beasts that control the world. That's not what the people who microdose say.
Mm-hmm.
So that what we're seeing in the culture, and I think in the athletic culture particularly, is people are microdosing and not saying much about it. And it's generally understood that it's helpful and that it's nobody's business. It's any more than if I have a brand new toothpaste that's better. That's not culture changing, but if it protects my teeth and I end up with teeth 10 years longer, that's huge. Okay, so incremental shifts are one of the easiest ways to change something is carefully and slowly, not by, revolution rarely seems to work. Evolution seems to be a better system. I notice nature doesn't suddenly say, hey, let's start a bunch of blue fish. Evolution says, here's a fish, we're going to put a little bit of blue in it and see what happens. Well, 10,000 years go by, not bad. I think they're doing better than the non-blue fish. Well, the bluer the fish, the more they're likely to survive, and so forth. The question, of course, for improving the human race is, do we have the time? The image of the human race river, and ahead we know there's this great cascade waterfall, is a pretty good image. So if you're lying around on the raft, maybe you should be paying more attention because you don't have that. And that's a different set of issues.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think about even, some of the research on large dose psychedelics that are, they don't say in the research that they're magic pills, but things like, ibogaine treatments and, high dose sessions that seem to immediately change or alter someone's trajectory in the way that they think about things, especially with like addiction and depression and suicidality and things like that. But even in those high dose sessions, it's not an immediate thing. If you look very closely, like, it involves a process before and preparation, the actual session, and integration for many sessions, if not years afterwards. And it's slow incremental behavioral change based off of maybe a big message received during that session. But now we're starting to see, microdosing being useful for also like clinical ailments. So use in addictions, use in dementia and Alzheimer's and physical health issues, chronic pain and headaches and things like that, and using them incrementally over time to produce these benefits. But you're right. I totally, I want to pay some attention to that too, that, we're finite in our lifespan, and we have only so far we can go down that river before we end up going over the waterfall. But yeah, I mean, I just see the potential out there too, but people do need to realize that even when using microdosing for clinical applications in the future, it still involves action and work and small behavioral changes on the part of the person imbibing the substance. It's not just a magic pill that you take and then you feel better or you do better.
Well, one of my resources now is not the Journal of Psychopharmacology, but a Reddit. And Reddit has a subreddit called Microdosing. And last time I looked, it had about 129,000 people on.
Wow.
And when a topic is raised, there's 30 to 80 comments. And they range from kind of worthless to people really struggling to be of use and to clarify and expand and help and support and question whatever the particular person has brought up. So you get a really good view of what people in the microdosing world are doing. And I make a big deal out of the difference in microdosing is it's a little bitty thing and it doesn't disturb your day versus a high dose, which transcends your life. But the other microdosing, and you're bringing it up, is you don't do it once. And I've been moving a whole lot of old files into categories where I can actually find them. And I came across a report on migraine headache. And someone said, here's my report on migraine headaches. When I started microdosing, I had 16 headaches in March, and with an average pain threshold of 6.5, okay? And in April, pretty much a similar number, not quite as intense. And in May, there were like 4 headaches. And in June, there was 2, okay? Now, this being inadvertent science, and the person said, and then I ran out of material. And so we then get 3 more months of high of 16, 18, and then the person gets material again, and it takes another couple of months, and then there's 1 month of 0. Okay. Now, what we know about migraines is we don't know much about migraines. Okay, and all medications on the market are kind of suppressants. Now, this isn't a cure, as you can tell from this one person, but taking it repeatedly is a miracle. And so we really haven't begun to look at that. That's the area of periodic taking, different one, because we have the model in psychopharmacology that when you take an antidepressant, it makes life bearable for 16 hours. And then if you don't take another one, you'll feel terrible, but you take another in 16 hours and so forth. No improvement, and no improvement expected. It's all control. And when you stop taking it, you're no than you were before. Taking a microdose it's a different model, even though you're taking it, a few times. And we haven't begun to really explore that because we're coming up against the psychopharmacological model, which is you take it for suppression, you don't take it for cure.
Sure. And I think I have a question for both of you guys, and I'd like to hear what you have to say on this. As far as using, I'm wide open about this on my podcast. I'm a former alcoholic in my late teens and 20s, and I got sober through traditional 12-step and abstinent models. I wish I would have known about psychedelics for addiction back then. But so microdosing for addiction. I want to know from you guys, and there hasn't been that much inquiry into this, except for anecdotal and through things like Reddit. But how could that work? How could microdosing potentially work for addiction? And also, as a secondary question, is there a potential for microdosing itself to become an addictive practice? Now, I know that the molecule itself is highly anti-addictive and that you can't get addicted to the molecule, but I've known a couple people in my time who seem to be addicted to the state that they're in when they're on the microdose, such that even when they're following your Fadiman protocol once every 4 days, they really, really look forward to those days where they microdose. And on the days where they're not, they don't necessarily slip into a depression, but they're just like, yeah, I wish today was a microdosing day. And they look forward to it, or they might start taking more than a microdose on those days to get the effect. And it starts to turn into almost like a chasing after or craving some sort of feeling. So both those questions: how would it work for addiction? And then does it have the potential to become addictive towards just that good feeling that you get?
Well, Adam probably has some interesting addiction stories, and I'll take the theoretical one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I really feel like the microdosing of psilocybin specifically has been incredible as an addiction disruptor for a lot of different clients in Europe that I've worked with. It's been helpful with alcohol addiction. It's been helpful with addiction to antidepressants. It's been helpful with tobacco. So really, I've seen it work effectively across the board with all kinds of addiction. What's amazing is all of these people are not suffering from withdrawal. They're not reporting withdrawal. And I think that has to do with something along the lines of the mushrooms working with their gut and their brain at the same time. But I really feel like these sub-threshold doses act as a disruptor to the actual addiction. For those people that are using microdosing to get off a substance, it's very important that something like antidepressants or other medications, it's tapered very slowly, and it's a long period of time. And so some of these people that are looking to get off Percocets or heavy opiates, they might need to microdose more often at the beginning to get off these medications. What's incredible about microdosing is a lot of these people are addicted to taking a substance every day. Once we get them through the actual withdrawal part of it, they actually switch to a protocol of day on, day off, or like the Fadiman protocol every third day. And what's fascinating is they're doing just as good on that second day or the day off, what we call the afterglow or the 48-hour effect, as they are on the day on. So I'm seeing a lot of people being successful, and that actually the longer they're microdosing, the less they're actually needing to take the substance during the week. So that's been my experience, that it's been extremely successful as somewhat of an addiction disruptor, and really helping them to move forward from whatever substance had been holding them down for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have some studies. I mean, we have some of the people who've written into us, and they have been able to get off of major addictions. I looked closely at those, but there's a general pattern where people will say, I took such and such reasons, but I notice when I'm writing you a report at the end of a month of Fadiman protocol that I am smoking less pot, I am drinking less coffee, I am having less alcohol. And some of them say, this is total surprise, and I don't know quite why. Others say, I'm aware now that the reason I took or take those things is I'm asking for either a little jolt, say coffee, or I'm asking for a little dimming down of sensation with alcohol. And I find simply, as they are observing themselves, gee, I have less need for that. I mean, it isn't that I'm saying I'm stopping drinking because I'm microdosing. It's I'm microdosing and I notice that instead of 2 beers, I have 1. And that, I of course, am fascinated when people say I notice, because what they're saying is their system is running better. The image is, take your car in for a tune-up They don't do anything to it. There's no, it says, okay, they charged me for some oil, but there's no new parts. They didn't mill anything down. They just tweak it a little so that the whole car runs better. And that seems to be what microdosing does. So I like the term that Adam is using. It's an addiction disruptor, because addiction is a need that is almost being met. That's why we're addicted. If it met, you wouldn't need it so much. But, and this is, I'm very moved by Julie Holland's new book, where she really in detail shows you how your brain hormones and your body hormones work with different mental states, with love, with hate, with addiction. And what microdosing seems to do, and you said it earlier, Adam, it kind of smooths things out. Things that are difficult, they're still difficult, but they're not difficult and upsetting. And that's a shift that is small in magnitude, but monumental in import.
Yeah. Adam, did you have anything to add to that too?
Well, Jim, just remind me of the stories and the emails and the messages that I get from clients, and specifically a couple mothers in particular that had really been struggling in the pandemic with online school and patience for their kid and spilled milk, all that stuff. And 3 hours into microdosing, I'm getting a text saying, I love my kids again, I've got patience. And so it's just, people need that disruption. And I think that is the default mode network area in the brain. I really feel like what is happening is these small doses are somewhat blocking that area. They're blocking the area that we default to that's negative all the time. And at the same time, I think psilocybin is really powerful in that it gives people empathy and self-love for themselves. And I think a lot of time with addiction, what people are doing is they're covering up pain from past trauma. And what microdosing has done for me specifically in the 2+ years that I've been using it is it's allowed me day by day, brick by brick, baby step at a time, to really look at past trauma in my life and really rewrite that story and really see it as a huge blessing or something that was important. And so for people that are addicted, that's huge for them. That's huge for them to look at their trauma with empathy and to forgive themselves and to look for a way to rewrite it and have some kind of happy, positive ending. So more than anything, we as human beings, we default to negativity. We spend most of our day looking for the worst case scenario. It's the Cub Scout motto. It's just what we've been taught. And I think more than anything, microdosing changes that. It gives you a more positive perspective. You aren't always looking for the worst case scenario. And most importantly, instead of nightmaring all the time, you're daydreaming. You're thinking about fun things. You're thinking about doing things that are joyful. And that's life-changing for people, especially for adults. For me at 39, when I started microdosing, I didn't know how to have fun. I didn't know what brought me joy. And little by little, the microdosing showed me exercise. It showed me breath work, cold water immersion, saunas, all that stuff. And so more than anything, people need that day to day or every other day or every third day. They just need that little help to get them out of that default mode where they're nightmaring all the time and to connect them back to that childhood mental state of daydream. And so that's what I tell a lot of my clients is stop nightmaring, start daydreaming. And that combined with the microdosing is just hugely uplifting for people.
I love that message. And so the second question I asked too, what is the potential for people to become addicted to that daydreaming state? It's such a lovely state when you're microdosing and the everyday normal things and that you're looking at and experiencing are just beautiful and magical, and everything you're doing is so interesting, and like that state, that mental state in my mind has the potential to become addictive in and of itself.
Well, what we have to do is we have to set up clients to have things like exercise and meditation and yoga and things they do on their day off so they can still get to that state. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, that was beautiful. What the people in Reddit say, my research group, they say, hey, man, you still got to do the work. Mm-hmm. And they say it works a lot better when you're doing meditation. It works a lot better when you're eating better. It's part of a program. You know, when you go to the gym, you don't say, you know, I have pectorals that are too small, and that's all I want to do. And the guy at the gym says, if you know, I'll be happy to charge you for that, but that's really dumb. Have you noticed that your pectorals are connected to some of the other parts of your body? And is your life connected to this? So the question is, are you going to be addicted to happiness? Now, I'm not sure what Adam's doing, but I have a little bit of tea here because it's that time of my day, and it's the English have taught us about tea time. Do I need this tea? That's a tricky question. Okay, will I survive without it? Of course. Will I actually be able to do a 2-hour, session with you without it? Of course. Is it easier with it? Yes. And I must say, the idea of being addicted to beauty and happiness and joy, and that you are taking a little bit of a mushroom, which you, as someone has said, and I like the image, is you can grow in a shoebox a year's worth. And I'm already using all kinds of things to keep my body going. Some of them are called proteins, some are called carbohydrates, some are called aesthetics, right? That what we know is if your life isn't working, take a walk in nature. And one of the nice things, two things we know in nature, one is you're getting bathed in literally microscopic amounts of certain chemicals which support health. Because plants, think of a tree and think of viruses and bacteria. Trees are forever having to stay healthy because as soon as they're not healthy, a lot of things eat them. Mm-hmm. So literally, nature is a health spa. Okay, that a park is a health spa. That tending a garden is a health spa, and that microdosing is one of the things that goes into that mix. So the other question is, can people get addicted? People get addicted to fondling shoes, okay? And nobody's ever demonstrated that fondling shoes has any redemptive effect, except for the people who do it. And they say, man, you don't know what it's like to curl up with a new tennis shoe, and it just makes your day better, okay? So I'm pretty open to a lot of bizarre things. Bizarre to me are not bizarre to anyone else. And if microdosing becomes part of the culture, and it's anti-addictive, which is you just can't do it every day. If you do, nothing works. And also, as I was listening to Shane, I thought, that sounds a little high dose to me. And a high dose for a microdose is you're aware that things are just a little tingly. The flowers do smile at you. They don't make a big hooray, he's found us, if you would a higher dose, but they kind of look nice at you. That's a little too high. And I have a kind of very simple story of what too high means, which is because there's an awful lot of people out there that are clear that if some is good, more is better. And in the case of microdosing, that isn't the way it works. And this is a guy in sales, and I've mentioned this story before, but it's so clean. He's in sales and he's having a better time and he's eating better and he's nicer with his kids and all those usual microdose things. And he decides 10 is good, 20 must be better. So he takes 20 micrograms of LSD and he goes to work. And there's a sales meeting and he's in the meeting and he realizes that he doesn't care about this meeting and that he doesn't really care about the product. He doesn't really care about sales. And at that point, he realizes that this isn't a good attitude for earning a living, and intelligently leaves the meeting and says, I don't think I'll do that again. So just as we know from alcohol has a lot of positive effects at a certain dose. But we all know, undoubtedly from personal experience, that above that, at the time, you think that's a good idea. But as you reflect on what you did or didn't do, as you're lying at the edge of the gutter throwing up, you think maybe I had a little too much. Maybe that wasn't a good idea. My system has internal regulators that let me know when something is excessive. And when things start to have what we know from a high dose, when it starts to look a little bit like that, that just says you've overdosed. And what we found, in my little mechanistic way, when I was first doing the research, 10 micrograms was about right. And so 10 micrograms became the dose. Well, when you have a few thousand people writing you, you learn stuff. And what we found is, say, out of every 100 people, maybe 15 or 20 would say by the end of the month, the dose is too high. That 8 micrograms, 7 micrograms, and similarly with psilocybin. And literally, if you could do a snapshot of what we said some years ago versus what we say now, we've lowered what we say the dose range is when we recommend what a microdose is, so that people actually use less. And in terms of the addiction question, which is where we started this, I'm sure that some people will get addicted because people are addicted to, to peanuts and porn and whatever. But on the whole, after a month of microdosing, correct, the way we've asked them to, and when we say at the end of the month, you're on your own, do what's correct for you and your body, almost everyone uses it less often. So the inclination to addiction is not general. And I'm sure that in your world, Sean, you've met people for whom they may say, I'm an addictive type, meaning anything that I really like, I'll overdo. And microdosing, it's harder to overdo it, but people are always capable of misuse.
Yeah, it almost seems like the molecule. I mean, those of us who have imbibed the molecule, we know the wisdom that it holds, and it's almost like it has a self-correcting mechanism built into it, to where if you try and abuse it over time, it naturally will self-correct you towards less and less use. I know that in my own microdosing experience, and I first started microdosing years ago, I was on, a strict protocol, and I stuck to it for over a year, and it worked well for me. But now, years later, I find myself, maybe microdosing once a week or twice a week, but not even close to a protocol. Sometimes I'll go entire months and not even think of having a microdose. And my thinking is that, when you're already feeling good and jazzed up and happy, and you already feel like you're on a microdose, like probably don't need to take a microdose to enhance that type of feeling. It almost like it naturally retrained me into a different mode of operating. Like you said, Adam, with the default mode network, probably just rewired my default mode to be a happy, grateful type of person. So yeah, I love that. It has a self-correcting mechanism in there, possibly.
And I just want to say real quick too that the mushrooms have an intelligence, and if somebody's abusing them and taking them every day, they're going to build the tolerance.
Yeah.
And by the end of 3 weeks of taking it, they're not going to be getting the benefits from the microdosing, and the intelligence is going to be, you need to take a break, and you need to respect this, and you need to space it out more. Now, the Western medical model is, hey, we're going to get you on Wellbutrin or this SSRI. You got to take this every day. Or, hey, we're going to get you on this kidney or heart meditation. You have to take this every day for the rest of your life. That's what's different with microdosing, specifically when I'm coaching people on protocols. From my own personal experience, it's been 2 years myself of microdosing, and I literally forget to microdose.
Mm-hmm.
My days are so good. Again, like you just said, maybe the default mode network is rewired to more daydreaming, but my days are so good I forget to take them. Same for my clients. So again, I think as far as abuse goes, if they take them every day, they're not going to work anymore. And that's when they'll learn to respect them. They'll learn to space them out. For my clients, the longer they microdose, the less they need it. I have one woman who's a diabetic, and she takes 1 microdose a week, and that keeps her sugars at a lower level for 7 days, and she only needs it once a week. So again, if people take it every day, it's going to set them up for a tolerance. So I do think that you know, it'll set people up to take it less the longer that they take it.
So that's basically the data. You know, that's how it works. And I use the example sometimes when people talk about that we have a different kind of tolerance, which is, you know, what's your favorite dessert? Oh boy, here's your favorite dessert. Oh, yum, 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 yum. Now, the next day, I'm giving you your favorite dessert. Yum, yum.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving you your favorite. Is that my favorite dessert again? And I recall, as that comes back to me now, I haven't thought about it for decades. I think I was in high school and my father had remarried someone very nice. And she knew that I liked a particular flavor of ice cream. And that's all there ever was. And I haven't had it, you know, I can't bear the thought of it. So that the system does look at that. But, and Adam had a little throwaway line in there, which it could upend a vast amount of the culture, which is, oh, there's this woman diabetic and she keeps her blood sugar down to normal by microdosing once a week. The implications of that are staggering. Mm-hmm. And we haven't begun to look at that, probably because one, psychedelics are still not yet legal in most parts of the world, and until maybe this year, almost all the research is done on high doses. There's now a lot of research starting to come out on microdosing. So we're going to, it's going to both be more acceptable scientifically, and a lot of the new companies that are imagining themselves to be revolutionizing mental health or physical health are saying that microdosing is what they're actually developing. None of, at the moment, by the way, almost none of them are. It's a term in psychedelics yet for vaporware. Maybe imaginary mushrooms. But they're saying this is going to be used for Alzheimer's, this is going to be used for obesity. They're saying these are big, and what we're finding is some of that may actually be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was, you know, on that topic of like new insights, new things coming out around microdosing. Adam informed me, Jim, that you have a new book coming out, or if it's already out, Symphony of Selves.
Hint.
Yeah, nice. And I was hoping you could. Oh, nice. I need a copy. I'm the only one without a copy here. Yeah, so can you tell the listeners what this book is all about? And also I'd be curious to know if you microdosed at all in the compilation of your book.
Well, I've been working on this question of how do we best describe the human consciousness for over 25 years. So it way precludes microdosing. And I can't point to that psychedelics are the great breakthrough here. But it seems fairly obvious that we are more than one self. Now, when I say it's fairly obvious, yeah, I have a PhD in psychology and it never got mentioned. And I've read a lot of philosophy and it never got mentioned. But if I looked carefully in both psychology and philosophy, it peeks out. And I'll give your audience a very simple test, which is, do you have more than a single self? And the question is, have you ever argued with yourself? Okay. Who's that other person? It's very simple. See, oh, that's, well, I guess it's me. Okay, well, how can there be two of you? Well, the answer is, how can you have two hands? How do you have four valves to the heart? There's nothing divinely inspired about singleness, even though monotheism is a notion that there's only one divinity. All of the nature religions, if we can call them that, think that's an obvious, silly simplification. You know, it's like there's only one water, but there's an awful lot of different forms it comes in. Mm-hmm. So the book basically goes through how you can begin to watch yourself change selves, and how you notice fundamentally that you're not consistent. And we don't want to be consistent ourselves, but we want the people who are around us, who matter to us, to be consistent, meaning predictable. And when they're not, we get upset. What we understand is the reason that people are not consistent is because they are consistent within selves. So and Adam, you're a parent, okay? And when you're a parent, that's not the same as when you're working with a confirmed alcoholic who is trying desperately to save his own life. You just are in a different mode. And you're not in a different mood, you're a different being. And actually physiologically you measure differently. So we're looking at this very basic shift. And what I found, I've written a self-help book, and I'm aware of that world, and this is not a self-help book. Self-help books have one problem, is you read them and they tell you got to do stuff. Okay, I'm supposed to do affirmations, I'm supposed to do prayer, I'm supposed to do, go back into the garden, I'm supposed to eat differently, I'm supposed to do something differently at the gym, I'm supposed to work through some trauma, I'm supposed to date again, whatever it is. Self-help books, you end up and you're supposed to do stuff. And what is lovely about your Symphony of Selves is people read it and they say, oh, I get it. Oh, I'm seeing differently. Oh, my wife, during her period really is different. And it's not surprising because her whole hormones are different. Oh, when my kids are tired, they're really hard to deal with. And it isn't that they're not the same kids, they're the same body, but they're quite different. Oh, I have a dog who's really loving, but there's another dog in the neighborhood, and when my dog sees the other dog, this rotten, vicious little being on a leash suddenly appears, and after the other dog goes away, my little loving dog returns. We see great differences in people. And your Symphony of Selves basically walks you through the basics, as well as your goal is not unity, not being squashed into one unified thing, but to be in harmony. Your goal is to be harmonious so that you're in the right self at the right time. And if you listen to an orchestra, you're listening to the orchestra, and then you're listening to the strings. And then after a while, there's the piccolos, and the strings are not quite as loud, but they're still playing. And then there's this guy with a kettle drum who's waiting for his moment, and the little kid with the triangle who's got one little triangle in the whole symphony. And each part fits into a larger organized whole. That's what human beings go for. Only if you believe that you have to be unified and consistent, you can't get there. So that's in a nutshell an awful lot of scholarship that my co-author Jordan Gruber really added to some ideas that I've been working on. So it's very much it's appropriate that there should be at least two authors for such a book.
Yeah, and go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've thoroughly enjoyed this book, and one of the great people from an icon that we all know that Jordan brings into the book is David Bowie. And he uses David Bowie as an example of the Symphony of Selves, and it shows all the transition of Bowie through all of the years. And I just want to say this book has been really helpful for me, and I recommend it for my clients as well, because I think it really adds a whole next level of self-love for people. I think when people can realize that they really are made up of multiple personalities, that they can have a lot more compassion and empathy for themselves. So I really highly recommend this book. And although he says it's not psychedelic, I think psychedelics are substances that lead us more towards empathy and self-love. So I think this book does work for people, even people that really enjoyed his psychedelic works, I think can still get a lot out from this amazing piece of work.
What I've found, and really Adam has been helpful, but other people as well, is it's a useful book, and I would now recommend it strongly for people doing integration work. Because when you have a high dose, you're kind of letting yourselves go,
untangling
all the strings, and then you're pulling them back, And your goal is to not have them appear exactly the same way. Your goal is to have an improved harmony between your parts. And it's a lot easier when you understand that you have parts.
Yeah.
So that I'm now beginning to see, and I hadn't really seen it as I was writing this, that this is really a basic integration text.
I absolutely love that. And, you know, both of you have been on my show before. So, you know, that the first question I always ask was, you know, what does conversations with the mind mean to you? You know, since that's the title of the show. And Jim, I'm just remembering your answer last time I had you on is so similar to, you know, what you've written about here in this book about the symphony or about the multiple selves, you know, being in harmony and speaking with each other. I just had, right now I'm taking this class at Colorado State called The Metaphysics of Self. And it's a fantastic class. It blows my mind every time I go. But the instructor, Professor Matt McKenzie, he's the chair of the philosophy department. I just had him on my podcast in the episode right before this, and I hope you guys take a listen to it because not only do we talk about his own theory, his book that he's writing called the Embodied Luminosity, which is his theory of the self, but it's built off of this idea that, you know, in the past, many philosophical thinkers of the self have been very reductionist in their approaches and really reduced it down to, you know, like you said, a singular unified thing or a no thing, you know, no self in Buddhism, or, you know, very reductionist in their approach. But there's these emerging theories, which yours, I think, fits into this class of dynamic systems. Which come together and have these emergent properties that consciousness emerges from. And so one of the ones that we read about last week was Gallagher's pattern theory of self, and sort of similar to what you're talking about, multiple selves. He kind of breaks it down into 8 different selves that we sort of jump in between, or we hold on to a few of them at the same time and try and harmonize. Some examples are like our affective self, our inner subjective self, our psychological self, our narrative self, our extended selves, you know, the selves that we hold in our material goods and things like that. So we have all these different things, and not one thing is the self, but the self is all these things in combination in a specific concert, and everybody's self is different. And none of those components are completely essential for a self to happen, because there's always these extenuating case examples of how someone doesn't have a bodily self, can't feel their body, you know, and so that's not an essential piece. But I love how you take this non-reductionist approach, and I can't wait to read it. I'm sure that it's going to be much more readable and reader friendly than a lot of this deep philosophy work that we've been digging into this semester. Is really dense stuff, some of this stuff, but I'm excited to get a copy.
So one of the nice things is you'll turn to the philosophers chapter and you'll recognize a lot of people, and you will notice that they've all touched on it from Plato on.
Mm-hmm.
And actually Plato really got it probably from Indian sources. But since it is the way it is, you see, our book isn't about, we have no theory. Okay. We just observe the way things are. And our test is, if you observe through the lens of internal multiplicity, a lot more things make sense. Okay. And that's kind of what science is supposed to be about. And one of the examples is there was a whole period of thousands of years where the notion was the Earth was the center of the solar system. Mm-hmm. And that was okay because it didn't much matter. But astronomy got better and better mathematically, and they were very clear that planets moved periodically into the same place. So they had an orbit, but the orbit had to be around the Earth. But since it isn't around the Earth, it got really messy. And the way in which it was described, and they actually worked out mathematically the orbits that planets would have to go around the Earth. And instead of looking like this, they looked a little bit like this, and then like this, and they had a notion of kind of epicenters to make the math work out.
Mm-hmm.
But the relief that happened in astronomy when the actuality was made clear, the science leapt ahead. And what we're saying is, when people understand themselves more clearly by observing just themselves and seeing a couple of hundred examples to make it easier, when your life works better, it works better because you understand life better. Kind of very simple. It's why we all went to school, and we learned, for instance, that if there's a red light, if you're in a car, stopping works for everybody. There's no theory about it. There's no theory of stoplights. Okay. And if you're a pedestrian, you also know what cars know, and that you have some special rules, like cars may not remember all the rules, and you have to be extra careful because you're soft and they're hard. That's not a theory. So this is not a theory book, though undoubtedly there'll be a wonderful philosopher who will work with it and turn it into some fantastically wonderful theory that you will then have to study. Mm-hmm. But with us, you're just going to get observation. It's a little bit like the microdose world. You know, when I said we made the doses lower. Why do we make the doses lower? Because people said you need to make the doses lower. That's not a theory of brain chemistry. That's simple observation. And so I'm kind of an old-fashioned scientist before there were any, instruments. There were there's no microscopes in microdosing. And that's kind of almost a bad joke, so I will let it pass. Because the fact is, and Adam referred to it in his own behavior, is they have done some research where they're giving individual neurons microdoses, which is really, really, really small. And what happens is the new neuron, it becomes healthier. It is more complex. It has more dendrites. It has more basically communication modes. It's a healthier, better cell. That's the effect of microdosing. So when Adam talks about his own life shifting and that he doesn't microdose much because he's happier and a lot of other nice things, it's likely that he has gently rewired his brain towards a better brain. And a better brain is more open and has access, obviously, to positive emotions and positive biochemical feelings and so forth.
Yeah, and I absolutely love the metaphor of the symphony and music, and I've been thinking a lot about that too. I mean, even the word universe, uni and verse, one song, right? That we are a part of this one song, and when life seems to be going well, it seems like we are in harmony with that one song. When life is not going so well, it seems like we've hit a note that we are just out of tune all of a sudden with the universe around us. And same thing goes for like when you're listening to music on headphones and you hear a song that just really gets you and makes your whole body shake and tremble with joy and love and beauty. Like that is being in that harmony, in that tune with that song. But when you listen to a song that is out of tune or, just not your liking, you can feel it. And same thing with the brain too. And with the rewiring with microdoses, you are bringing your brain back into synchronous harmony with the universe around you. Yeah.
That's right. And when you're there's I think it was an old advertisement in New York, which is when you're something about if you're in love, you'll love Levy's rye bread, or that something like that. When you're feeling good, our product is something you'd like. And we know. See, it's curious when we feel good. Isn't it amazing how much nicer everybody is?
Yeah.
And there's two things that are happening. One is you're not so judgmental, and two is you're radiating a more healthy vibration, and that attunes with other people and they feel better. It's like when you're in a car, and in the car next to you, there are small children, and they wave at you. You feel good. Okay. Now, nothing's happened. Okay. And not only that, but if you're the small child, you have learned a way to get adults to change their moods. You say, and they say to each other, look, we're going to wave, and look at that person. They smile at us. You know, the kids say we're like training the adults. And from the adult point of view, you love the training. And so what Adam was talking about is a microdose makes it easier to notice that level of reality. It's always there. And the dark side is always there. And it's a question of what you spend your time and energy doing. And microdosing makes it easier to take more positive choices. And positive choices, fortunately, feed on themselves.
Yeah, they snowball on each other.
Yeah, and when we were talking, Shane, you asked me the conversations for the mind, and I was explaining to you how I really felt like society had taught me in my mind to have a negative voice, right? And to always talk negative, default mode network, trauma, negativity. And I can't say enough the whole image of rewiring and rewriting your story. And that's what these doses of microdosing or small doses of psilocybin have really helped me do. They've literally rewired my brain, where for 39 years, I was addicted to misery. Now I have an addiction to happiness and joy. And that's something that I never, ever would have thought that you could get. I've tried antidepressants, I use cannabis, I've taken large dose journeys. But again, you eventually get to the point where you're not needing the substance as much. This is not good for a pharmaceutical big pharma model. I mean, they don't want to produce a product that after a month or 2 or 3, the person might only need to take once a week. So again, it's really, really beneficial. People need to be rewriting that story. They need to be rewiring that inner voice for positivity. And in the middle of a pandemic, that's hard, which is why I really think microdosing can be this tool and this aid for people to really uplift their mood and uplift their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to be respectful of your guys' time. We're coming up to our 2 hours, and I wanted to make sure that we saved a little bit of room to talk about the Denver psilocybin panel and the work that we're doing here in Colorado. And also, really importantly, looking to the future too. And here I want to hear from both of you guys what you think the future of microdosing looks like for our country, for our species, because it's one thing to look at the past and you got to know your history. It's another thing to look at the present and do your work in the present, but we have to have a vision too. We have to be looking forward and anticipating and really having a lot of hope and great ideas for what this thing can be. So I want to open it up to you guys to ask me about the Denver panel or to comment on what you see going on in Colorado or at large in Oregon, things like that, and then also to talk about the future of microdosing.
Well, I'd really like to understand the panel, because Denver is running an experiment. The experiment is not decriminalization. The experiment is trying to have the ruling city council and all of organs understand what's going on, either small or large, so that they can behave appropriately. It's the way when if you're going to put in a subdivision, you talk to the road people, you talk to the sewage people, you talk to the infrastructure, because people kind of know what infrastructure is going to be valuable in this new development. So decriminalization is a new development, and it looks like the Denver City Council has made you guys the people who are trying to figure out what's the correct infrastructure. Is that realistic? Is that what you guys?
Yeah. And I've never heard it described that way, but I love that. I'm a big fan of metaphors and pictures. It makes my brain very happy. But that's what we are. We're 10 10 individuals that were selected to represent various you know, subsets of people within Colorado. You know, as part of the Decrim initiative, this council was formed, and we were only tasked with one objective, which our deadline is coming up at the beginning of 2021, and that objective is to produce a comprehensive report for city council and for the mayor around, you know, what have been the implications, what have been the outcomes of decriminalization of psilocybin, and is it feasible for the future? So, you know, we have members of MAPS on our panel. We have the district attorney. We have the chief of police, the sheriff's department, Denver Safety Commission, city council members. We have all sorts of, you know, legislating bodies. We have Kevin Matthews, our president from SPORE, who represents psilocybin reform efforts, myself being on the panel representing mental health and addictions professionals across the state. And yeah, we come together, and those of us who are a little more educated on the topic of psilocybin, we are bringing the research to the table for those who aren't as educated, but very interested. You know, we've gotten such a warm response from the other panel members who have no psychedelic experience themselves. And they're, you know, they hear about it on 60 Minutes, they hear about it on NPR, they hear about it from Michael Pollan's book, and they want to know more. And so we are sort of their lifeline to the cutting edge research, and we bring in these great guests and introduce them to all the different facets of what this is, what it could look like, and additional ideas. Like right now, myself and Sarah Gale from MAPS are working on a curriculum with MAPS to give to the multi-responder units in Denver, so police, fire department, EMTs, co-responders with the police, anybody who interacts with folks who might be on psychedelics. And we're giving them additional training up to a medical level, as far as like how to intervene with folks so that you don't cause increased trauma, so that you can intervene in a therapeutic way, even turn an interaction with somebody into an opportunity for growth, as opposed to, you know, just managing the safety of the situation. So we're right now we're in the process of putting that together. That's one of the products that we're going to be pushing out, hopefully next year. But yeah, I'm so glad that you guys are going to come on the panel and talk. But yeah, that's a great metaphor. So we are trying to get all the infrastructure, all the people who are involved, as educated as possible, so that we can make future decisions for the city of Denver. Well, hopefully open it up for as a sanctuary city for therapists, and you know, open it up for research here in Denver, things like that too. So lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I absolutely see Denver, hopefully, not even hopefully, I see Denver being the leader with the way you guys set up the psilocybin review board. I'm very excited tomorrow morning to present to them on microdosing and introduce that concept and that idea to them. And as somebody that worked in the cannabis space for a decade, I really think that psilocybin microdosing should go the way of cannabis. And the way it should start is patients with treatment-resistant depression, major depressive disorder, anxiety, addiction. They should go to a licensed therapist or doctor. That doctor should then evaluate them to see if psilocybin microdosing could work for them. They would then get written a prescription. Now, here's the clincher, and here's the major difference from cannabis. Not only are they going to get a prescription to microdosing, though, they're going to be connected with a pre and post integrative specialist, whether that's a therapist, an addiction therapist, a doctor, whatever their need, they're going to be connected to a community with the prescription. So that is my hope as somebody who is an expert in regulation in the cannabis space, is that we can take some of the good things from cannabis regulation and the way that they use Prop 215. We could set up a place where doctors are really making sure that this is something that can benefit the patient. And then the patient is going to be tracked and supported throughout the course of their medication, which is very different than, per se, a doctor prescribing antidepressants and they never see you again. So I really hope that part of me presenting to Denver and the mayor and the DA tomorrow is really beginning to plant that seed of the idea that Denver could be the first, could be a pioneer in a safe and effective way for us to prescribe these medications and then follow up, track, and support the patient throughout the coming months.
Yeah, and even based off of the cannabis models that have been so successful, if you regulate it, test it, and tax it the way it has been, that tax money, I know Colorado has been thrilled with the excessive amount of tax money that it has had to spend because of cannabis. And with an additional tax revenue from psychedelics, a lot of that money, just like Oregon's model right now, they're proposing that money goes towards addiction recovery, getting more people off drugs, like paying for their integration services, paying for medical services, possibly paying for employees to employ safe use sites for some of these substances, and make it more economically feasible so that the money that goes into purchasing these substances goes right back to the community that needs it the most.
Now, is decriminalization doesn't include any money, does it?
It doesn't. No, it would have to be legalization. Yeah.
Okay, because I want to be clear that legalization is not what Denver did. And certainly Oregon did something quite different. And question, because I'm looking at the fact that Adam's model suggests that there is a way to control flow of a plant or of a fungus. That didn't ever work with cannabis, and it doesn't work too well with psychedelics either. So the question is, what can the city do to increase safety and efficacy? And one of the ways is when people who have a medical need, and it can be medically, but that isn't yet within, as I understand it, the Denver model. So it's good that I suggested that you didn't have Adam and I on the same day, because I love what Adam just said, and I would come, I just come from a different place. Fortunately, that's why you have different guests. So I'm looking forward to city council.
Yeah, and we're actually we're working on a campaign for full legalization across the state in one of the next election cycles. So that's definitely a next step. And
well, but the thing that you're doing is the curriculum, because indeed what we know is first responders make all the difference. And what we're kind of getting nationally is people who are trained to shoot at people doing crimes don't do well with mentally disturbed people, if they're ill or not. But when someone, when you put up your gun and the other guy sees that you've just opened this bouquet of flowers and he would love to have some, okay, it's very tricky unless you know. And the Zendo had a wonderful, when I was first discovering how wonderful the Zendo was, one of my graduate students said, here's our model. We never bring anyone down. And I looked at them and thought, whoa, what do you do? He said, we bring them through. And that's it. That's the model Adam is basically saying. And similarly, for first responders and for all those other people, part of the curriculum is you're there to help someone who would like to be helped. Very often, police are asked to come into situations where the people involved do not wish to be helped, particularly by police. So it is an interesting model, and I'm fascinated what decriminalization actually looks like, and that's part of what we on the outside get to learn about. Because I also spend a part of my week in Santa Cruz, which has decriminalized, and it's not clear what that means. Did talk to someone and said, hey, did you hear that Santa Cruz decriminalized? And she said, well, that's great, because I'm growing some mushrooms right now. But I don't think that was, that wasn't a full answer for how a community looks at this.
Yeah. So Jim, what is your ultimate vision for the future of microdosing, at least in our lifetimes?
I'm not very good at that.
Mm.
The future actually is usually so much more tricky than I am. But what I have said, because people are saying, oh, what do you think is happening with all this commercialization of psychedelics? And I say, it's going to be terrible. And that kind of stops the conversation for a moment now, while I think. And I think it will be terrible for a while, because greed is not, greed moves the culture very quickly, but doesn't necessarily move it ethically. And my feeling is, after the first wave of a few good companies and a lot of ones that could have been selling guns or pharmaceuticals and it wouldn't matter to them, out of that first wave, there'll be a number of really wonderful experiments that work well. And in the second wave, things will be much more helpful in the culture, kind of much more microdosing as just one of the things that a good culture should offer, just the way a good culture should offer education and vaccinations and so forth.
I like
if you
that.
think about, I could argue that, vaccinations change a culture by having people live longer. That's huge. But we don't think of vaccinations as a cultural force. We think of them just as a kind of, as a small interruption in a child's life where they don't get measles and whooping cough. But we don't really see how that affects the culture. And at the moment, microdosing is at the vaccination level. It doesn't bother people. That's the difference between it and high doses. Nobody is going to call for help for a first responder and say, I took 7 micrograms of LSD and and there are tigers coming up my stairs. Not going to happen. Okay, different use.
Yeah. Again, I want to be respectful of your time. I'm wondering, Jim, do you have time for one more question? Yes?
Yes, but it's got to be really good.
Okay. Well, I was hoping that we could end today on a story, because I know I love stories and the audience absolutely loves stories. And this is a story that Adam told me about that I have not heard or read about you. And I was hoping you could tell me the story of your links with Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that whole Merry Pranksters piece of history, because I have read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the electric Kool-Aid acid test. I've seen all the documentaries on the Merry Pranksters, and nowhere in there have I found Dr. Jim Fadiman. So I'm hoping you could tell me your story.
Well, the electric Kool-Aid acid test, if you read about page 4, now I know you read the whole book, you'll find that Dorothy and I went to visit, or to jail where Ken was. I would bring him, at his request, a copy of the I Ching. So we appear as very bit characters in that particular drama. The fact is that I did spend time with Kesey and the Pranksters. I was definitely not a member. I was welcome because I was a weird person. Now, as you see, I'm not especially a weird person, but in that group, the fact that I was doing legal psychedelic research made me weird. So I was kind of welcome, but I was never part of it. And I was, and it were, truly they were not my people. However, Dorothy, who had been a girlfriend of Kesey's at some point, that was my connection also to the Kesey group. And eventually Dorothy felt that whatever world I represented was more appropriate for her than the Kesey world, which was really very, very hard on people. They were wonderful explorers, but they were kind of like bad campers. They didn't clean up after themselves. And often there was a lot of broken stuff after they'd been there. So they were breaking social mores in a way that Leary would never dare. And they were remarkable people. And Ken is one of the great novelists of our generation, and a great social iconoclast. But and so I kind of drifted in and drifted out, and Dorothy drifted out with me. Um, and there was an evening in which Dorothy was on a psychedelic, which was not unusual, and there was a lot of other people doing other things. And gradually, I began to answer questions of hers from my training with high-dose psychotherapeutic sessions over a couple of years, and made that session, which for Dorothy might have gone quite badly, quite wonderful. And that was one of the core moments in our relationship when we became better friends, and eventually we became husband and wife. And it's been about 54 years, so we think we got something going, working so far. So there's a story. Not quite, it's not an exciting, Kesey prankster story, of which there are many, but those are really available. This is how some straight graduate student who happened to only be working with psychedelics managed to get friendly with the Kesey world for a while. And I also lived on the same little street, Perry Lane, where Kesey lived. So I had a little teeny house, and he had a little larger house, and there were other people, and there were street parties, and there was a great deal of community, of which you kind of got automatic membership through real estate.
Yeah. Well, it was a good enough story for Kesey to put you as characters in some of his books, and for you to show up in some of the same pages that he did. So thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing story. Sometimes I just love to like project myself back to the 60s or 70s, and would have loved to have spent a week or a month back then. Yeah.
Because we were also, again, in high discovery, and we were discovering as a culture, we were inventing ecology, we were inventing social justice, we were inventing women's liberation. It's hard to get back to an America that really didn't know what any of that stuff was. And the Kesey people were kind of, whenever they found a glass ceiling or a glass door, they say, well, why don't we just break it and see what happens? So at one point, Kesey was wearing an American flag on his tooth. Okay. Now, this was a period when there was a question of a constitutional amendment to make it a crime to desecrate the flag, to have it anything other than a flag. Okay. And here was Ken wearing the flag, no comment about it. And was that negative or positive? And from Ken's point of view, it got a lot of people thinking and acting in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise. And that was part of his modus operandi.
Yeah.
Enough for that. Well, I must say it is a pleasure to be with someone who is really on the cutting edge of the social revolution with your group in Denver, and who is able to not only have considerable psychedelic experience and ongoing microdose experience, but hanging in there through your dissertation. Because I'm aware that your dissertation asks of you to have a very different self available than this one, and the one that's on the mat, and the one that's with your wife. And so I honor the particular one that is able to write in a way that is disturbingly bad, which is called academic writing. And that in itself is an enormous sacrifice that people make in order to get a PhD, in order to help the culture. So I bow to that part of you which is saying, well, if we finish this show, I could read a couple of journal articles before the night is over. And the other part of you says, I don't want to read any journal articles. He says, you never want to read journal articles, but we have to. So
you read my mind on the journal article piece. I was like, man, I got to read for tomorrow's class. And yeah, but thank you guys so much for being on the show. It was so much fun, and it was an honor for me to be here to participate with you two. I have so much respect for you both, and I look forward to future endeavors and future communications with both of you. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Shane. Have a great evening, Jim. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.